Recently, I got to sit down for a couple hours with Outer Worlds 2, long enough to know what kind of planetary stew Obsidian's been slow cooking. This preview took place in a contained zone in Arcadia, one of the game's new focal locations, and what I saw was both familiar and reshaped. Let's start with the setting for a second. This time, Obsidian's dropping us into Arcadia, which is a colony that's torn apart by cosmic rifts and corporate ambition, which is actually not that much different from the original game. But here we're no longer wandering around the quirky yet tidy Halcyon. This is fractured, volatile, and desperate for control. A new location. You're still entering the story as a Earth Directorate agent, but now it's amid a three-way struggle between the authoritarian protectorate, a religious rebellion, and a ruthless corporate cult. Well, that's Auntie's choice. Each with their own vision for Arcadia's future. That means you got ideologies clashing pretty goddamn hard, and all of them want you in some way to help them carve out their own version of utopia, or at the very least shove everybody else off a cliff so that they can do it. Structurally, Outer Worlds 2 keeps its DNA pretty much intact. First-person combat, skill checks, dialogue options that go out through all the missions. But the systems are, in some places, expanded. Combat's been tuned up. And then everything just feels slicker. The ability to slide and switch between third and first-person view. Everything just feels like it comes to you a lot quicker than the original game. Obsidian clearly wants us to feel a bit more dynamic in how we move throughout it. Their perks and flaws system is back and deeper than ever. I'll talk about that in a second. You can choose from over 90 perks, even weaving into how dialogue and combat continually unfold. Then you leap in to create your character here. Now, Obsidian's made a huge deal about characters mattering more in Outer Worlds 2 than the prior game. This shows up in the choices you make and their impact pretty much right away that I got to test as I did the preview. It reminded me of Mass Effect 1 when picking that war-embittered Shepard versus the other backgrounds. The game takes into account which of the backgrounds and skills you've chosen, slightly changing not only the actual narrative of the first mission, but the entire vibe about going about it, depending on who you've chosen. Not only did the dialogue change, the entire framing of it did. One version had me walking into a situation with quiet, calculated confidence. Another had me perceived as an expendable asset sent to take risks because no one else would, or cared to. My hope is that it not only aims to do that throughout the entire game, but also adding some replay value, of course. Visually, the character creator still leans pretty conservative, though. You jump in and you're working with two body style types, male, female. You have a few preset faces, and then you have a light layer of sliders, just enough to personalize, but not enough to recreate your favorite K-pop star or Eldritch Nightmare. It's closer to Outer Worlds 1 than, say, Cyberpunk 2077. And that's probably fine for a first-person RPG, even if you're not going to be out there making a monster or making Miss USA. Even though, seriously, both of those probably are monsters. When it comes to the facial tweaking itself, it offers age and scars and makeup and skin tone gradients and the usual just suite of style polishers. But the actual structure of the face, it's locked to a starting frame and adjustments branch out from there. It works, but don't expect plastic surgeon level of granularity. Now, into the meat of the situation, you start choosing your skills and traits. In the preview build, you could pick from options like brawny, brilliant, heroic, lucky, nimble, and some others. Each one does what you generally think. For example, brawny means sprinting and sliding in enemies can actually damage them. Lucky's a flat 5% critical hit chance. No catch, just better odds at making more heads explode faster. Or witty, which means factions' reps won't go down below normal. Even if you're burning the goddamn thing to the ground around their heads, they'll still be like, you're okay in our book. Skills in Outer Worlds 2 are not going to be mind-blowingly original, though, but they're tuned for the game. You've got things like engineering, explosives, guns, hacking, leadership, lockpick, medical observation, and more. You also have things like medical, which not only gives you a plus 10 creature damage, but a plus 7 to your toxicity crash threshold. Translation: hit monsters harder, take more drugs, regret fewer decisions. Or you have things like science, which is a plus 7 gadget energy cap and a plus 10 to non-physical side effect stacking. The right pick if you want to become a chemical fueled themed boss fight for the enemies. And I saw some of those skills popping up in places. Once you get all that, you choose a name and you're off and dropped into a world. The game wastes no time setting the tone. Your first major job is to infiltrate a skip drive facility and borrow one of their top tier drives. For example, in this world, skip drives, for context, are how ships travel across massive distances in the galaxy by creating micro wormholes and punching holes in reality like a spatial colander. Turns out that might not be good for space, but it also may be the end of Blueberry Crunch cereal shipments. Yes, that was told to me. If it wasn't right away that I had accepted that challenge, the moment they told me that, nothing motivates me more than a threat to breakfast, so I was off. This is classic Outer Worlds when it comes to its satire and high stakes absurdity, where that line between sincere threat and corporate punchline is always just slightly smudged over the top of one another. For example, one of the loading screens suggested that changing graphical options is still free for now, as if even your options menu is one bad quarterly report away from monetization. But beneath the jokes is always something smarter, I think. The narrative layers and the questions always come up. Is your mission just a job? Is the client telling you the full truth? Are those anomalies the real problem or just an excuse? And maybe most importantly, are you the good guy or the full good guy or just the best equipped middleman bad guy in a multi-faction standoff? You never quite know. It's something I liked from the original game, and even in the small moments here, it fit. Now, every quest line I followed during the preview, which wasn't a ton, it was only an hour or so, and I did it a couple times, they all hinted at a bit of uncertainty as well as that overall Outer Worlds theme that you always feel. Not every villain felt truly villainous. In fact, a lot of the characters that you end up meeting in the game and killing don't necessarily feel like bad guys. And your team, while entertaining, isn't exactly elite special forces. The vibe is certainly less military precision and more Team America Freelance Edition. It's what you expect, overt military corporations that tell you what they're doing, and whatever horrifying thing they admit to is probably not as bad as what's actually going on. The preview mission also unfolded into a blend of what I would say would be Outer Worlds mechanics classic. Stealth, gunplay, and some dialogue, all fighting for screen time depending on how you approach any given situation. Your crew even splits up at one point in a full mission implausible fashion, each tackling a different objective, all while the comms are buzzing in your ear like a low-budget spy thriller, telling you things are, of course, not going the way you expected. You pick off enemies, loot their gear, weigh your next approach, repeat. But it is, as I said, slicker. Combat transitions a bit more fluidly from stealth to chaos, and moment-to-moment movements feel tuned rather than just passable, but I wouldn't say it's a massive jump. This is never going to be Doom when it comes to shooting. When this comes out, there's going to be another question about it. How does it run? We do know that when they did Spacer's Choice Edition, they had a lot of technical issues. I can say with this, Outer Worlds 2, it sticks to its visual roots, and by that I mean it still looks like someone retrofitted a 50s Sears catalog into a spacefaring bureaucracy. Uniforms are that boxy, slightly oversized, and covered in buttons that seem more decorative than functional look. Helmets still look like you could store your lunch in them. It's oddly charming. It's a bit over-engineered, but that aesthetic hasn't changed, and I dig it. The game retains its signature space corporate cosplay vibe all the way throughout it. But thanks to updated lighting with ray tracing here, the whole thing looks a bit more grounded, even though interiors they're more natural for sure. Reflections finally, reflect the right things and light sources actually behave correctly, but it's always got that color grading that you notice. The entire visual palette feels cleaner without sacrificing what I would say is the franchise's weirdo chic identity. And at least for my time here, it played, performance-wise, excellent, from the 2080 to the 4090. Shockingly smooth, actually, for a preview build. No stutters, no real dropped frames, no loading hitches. There was a stray shadow flicker here or there, but it was something that was in the notes as they were already aware of it. Now, when it comes to something I've always loved with the Outer Worlds, it's their audio. Audibly, the game actually seems to have taken a couple steps up. Not only are the sound effects a bit more pronounced, but there seems to be a bit more work on the reproduction of the environments. Walk into a skip drive complex and you're enveloped by a soundscape of airlock cycling, hydraulics twitching, and chemicals moving through unseen conduits. It's immersive, sure, but it's also misleading enough to make you question, is that a robot on the other side of the door or just a piece of equipment working? It's classic Outer Worlds in a way, world building through slightly suspicious detail, but I enjoyed it. The spatial mix also a bit tighter. Environmental reverb, directional audio cues, and ambient layering all feel just a bit more considered than the prior game. If you're playing with a decent headset, you'll catch little sonic breadcrumbs too. Gears spinning behind walls, radio chatter bleeding through a vent, that kind of thing. But that brings us to probably my favorite part of Outer Worlds, the original, and how it reflects in the sequel, and that is the actual narrative and how it's delivered with the voices. So far, at least what I've played, the voice work for all the characters that you deal with, even in the first mission, have just a slight hint of their own personality. Well, not only a slight, sometimes more than slight, but one of the things I liked about it is that it still replicates what you're supposed to be doing at any time without feeling out of control. So even if somebody's a little gung-ho or a little worried, it never ends up enveloping that entire situation, and that tact feels more slight than satire, and that subtle hand that's not too comical or too militaristic is actually where Outer Worlds always fit for me, and so far seems to fit here. What does make me wonder is if this will play out through the entire game, and how, if it does, it's handled, because the game has some darker themes that are hitting this time versus the prior game. There just wasn't enough in this preview, unfortunately, to get an idea of that. I will say some of the characters that you do meet, or one or two of them, had just enough, I would say, gravitas to make me actually want to continue to know them, which is above a lot of other games, I can say. And that brings us to fun. When The Outer Worlds came out in 2019, it was one of those games that I think reminded people that RPGs didn't have to be bloated monstrosities to be good. Bloated doesn't always mean bad. It wasn't the biggest game of the year. It didn't have the budget of a giant BioWare or Bethesda giant, but what it did have was some personality that actually fit for me. You could feel Obsidian's fingerprints all over it as well, and for a lot of players, that was exactly what they wanted. Something smaller, more handcrafted, not handicapped by extended fiction. And yeah, it was a little jagged at the edges, but alive. Obsidian's always had this knack for satire that's sharp but not smug, and The Outer Worlds is dripping in it, both the original game and now this one. For example, where the original game, the corporate-owned, I guess you'd call it colony, where everything takes place, is basically a brilliantly lit dystopia dressed up in cheerful slogans, and those slogans were always sort of humorous. The characters that spout them were absurd, but underneath that humor was some bleak-ass unchecked capitalism. I mean, think about it this way. That giant moon hat helmet you probably enjoyed traipsing around in was also a massive advertisement. And the better you did, the stranger it could feel, like a killing, murderous billboard with a big corporation's name as its design. The same can be said for the companions of the original game. While some of them were paper cutouts as somehow one of the factions seemed to have motorized and didn't really have a great deal of impact, others rocked. And of course, by others, I mean Parvati. Parvati was an awkward kindness and engineer soul in a single character, a fan favorite almost immediately. And when people talk about Outer Worlds, that character is almost always the first name that comes up. She wasn't flashy, she wasn't hardened, she wasn't the kind of character who bursts into the spotlight, and that's exactly why people liked her. She was awkward, soft-spoken, endlessly human in the setting that was really anything but that. Here's this colony full of greed and cruelty, and then you've got Parvati shyly asking your advice about talking to somebody, fumbling her words, and really a very excellent demonstration of writing. Her loyalty quest wasn't about killing some rival storming a fortress. It was about her nerves about talking to people. That's why she resonated. But sadly, even though you do have some interactions, we don't get to see that in this game. We do know a couple of the NPCs that are coming, Tristan and his Hammer of Justice. Each of them probably in some way are going to reflect the alliances to themselves or corporations or more shadowy agencies. But missing out on any real interaction with them in Outer Worlds 2's preview made it feel a little bit like they're either holding back the biggest ace in the hole or they have 2-4 off-suited and hope we don't notice. In the preview, other than a couple moments, you really have no idea how that's going to play out. The same can also be said for the factions. Though you work for one and you're heading into one to attack it, the only real information you glean is that perhaps the Protectorate may be as weird and creepy as you've heard. And the further you go, you hear more about brainwashing and chemical brain altering and an overarching political rule that sounds like a royal family if they were all just a bunch of Prince Andrew clones. Overall, I would say the Outer Worlds 2 preview was good. It was enjoyable, but it was very, very safe. If there's anything that you can pick up almost right away when we play a game, it's that Outer Worlds 2, at least at its first appearance, is directly a sequel, though. It's not a 0.5. It's not like which we've seen with other games, for example, something that's sort of a side game like Dying Light the Beast. This is a game that's solidly understanding of what the original title was, and for all intents and purposes, aims to improve on that experience and let you enjoy a familiar experience in a bigger, better, brighter, and what looks to be better running world. Let's hope it continues to be that way. Thanks for watching the preview. If you get a chance, check out the Patreon, check out the podcast. Hey, as you guys know, don't go on trips to do these previews. These are at my place. Don't get paid by anybody, no sponsors. The only support I got is YouTube views and you.